2025, and it's our time together today. And today, I want to continue talking about Joseph. Now, to summarize, we've been talking about Joseph, who, of course, is found in the book of Genesis. He was the favored son of Jacob. Now, Joseph, of course, and as we summarize, he was a man who was deeply loved by his father Jacob. Now, the problem, of course, with any type of favoritism, it creates animosity and hatred among the other siblings, especially your brothers and sisters. So, what happened was when Joseph got a coat of many colors, his brothers saw that as a deliberate sign of favoritism. It created a very difficult situation to the point where his brothers wanted to do something about that, and they chose to eliminate the problem. So when Joseph came down to visit them in a place called Dothan, then what happened was they threw him into a dry well. And while they were trying to figure out what to do with him, some Ishmaelite traders came along and they sold Joseph into slavery by selling him to the Ishmaelite uh, traders. Then they went down, the Ishmaelite traders took Joseph down into Egypt, where he was sold to a fella named Potiphar. He spent the next few years in Potiphar's house learning Egyptian society, as we talked about before, and that was that Joseph did not speak the language. He did not know the customs, and he didn't obviously know the religious system. But over time, he did learn the language. He became educated. He also, as well, became the steward or the manager of the extensive properties that Potiphar was in charge of. Potiphar, as we talked about last time, was, of course, the captain of the guard, or he was the top military man in the Egyptian army. So he had vast holdings and lots of property. He was also part of the upper echelon of the aristocracy and the nobility of Egypt. Joseph learned how to navigate Egyptian society. He also learned during that time period to be able to operate within Egyptian society. He learned how the Egyptians thought, and he became the manager of all Potiphar had. Unfortunately, being a handsome young man, he ended up catching the eye of Potiphar's wife. She attempted to seduce him and he rebuffed her. It led to a confrontation where he literally ran out of the area but left his coat behind. She called, of course, Potiphar when he returned home and told him that Joseph had tried to, attack her. And of course, what ended up is Potiphar became very angry. He believed his wife over, of course, Joseph. And that is normally what men do. And so Joseph was thrown into prison. And for the next several years, Joseph found himself as a prisoner. Now, it was interesting that we talked about before is that Joseph had learned how to, evolve and grow and plant and be planted and bloom where he was planted. So, as a prisoner, he became what we would call a prison monitor, or he became an individual who worked under the prison warden, and he basically took care of all the prisoners. So the warden basically made him, I guess we would call him today, the warden, unofficial warden of the prisoner warden of the prison. And so in that care, two men came into his care. One was the chief baker, and the other one was the chief cupbearer. They both had a dream. Joseph was able to interpret the dreams, and one of the men was eliminated. The other man was re-promoted. And as he was going out of the prison, Joseph said, "Listen, I am innocent of all the charges. Would you bring my case before the king and so I can get out of here? Well, the guy said, oh, yeah, I'll gladly do it. And as soon as he got out of the prison, he forgot about Joseph. Well, as it turned out, 2 years later, the king had a dream. Pharaoh had a dream. And when he had the dream, it was about a famine and also a time of plenty. Well, Joseph was able to interpret the dream, and in one day, he was promoted from prisoner to prime minister. And that's where we find ourselves right now. So, what happened was, of course, during the 7 years of plenty, Joseph was able to create a large administration, and he was able to put storage cities or storage different types of storage areas in different types of city, getting ready for the famine. Because as predicted in Pharaoh's dream, there were 7 years of plenty. And Joseph was responsible to make sure that Egypt was ready for the famine because the famine was coming. And so Joseph worked diligently during those 7 years. Now, as I talked about before, the empire of the Hyksos, they were called the Hyksos. They were a Middle Eastern people that had come in from other areas and was able to overthrow the old Egyptian dynasty. So they also came in with new ideas, and their capital city was called Amaris. And so that's where Joseph found himself in prison, and then, of course, prime minister in that area. What he did was his job was to administrate and to make sure that there was enough sufficient supplies to be able to handle the famine that was coming. Well, Joseph did exactly what was he was asked to do. In fact, when Joseph became prime minister, the Pharaoh recognized that this was a young man who had great skills, but more importantly, he was a young man that had administrative ability. And so, in that one day, Joseph was promoted from, of course, prisoner to second in charge of the entire Egyptian empire. And he did his job in the same manner that he did with Potiphar and the warden. He did it with, of course, the with as prime minister. Now, an interesting fact is, and I like this, both the warden and as well Potiphar had recognized the same quality that Pharaoh had recognized. Now, we're not sure exactly, how that process all happened. We only know that the Bible says that when the king heard the plan, he said, with all his administrators and his advisors, this young man should be the young man. There was something in Joseph that shone out. Now, we know, of course, as we read the text, number one, the Lord was with him. But also, as well, Joseph had been faithful. Joseph had been loyal. Joseph had also been truthful and honest and transparent in everything that he did. These are qualities that, of course, will make us stand out. So when you are doing your ordinary life, I was reading today that legacy is not, the things that you own or that you possess at the end of life. Legacy is how you interact with people and how you made them feel, and how also, as well, your relationship with them. That is legacy. Joseph was a man that was sowing legacy. Now, as predicted, and this is where it gets really interesting. So, the first year of the famine hits, and instantaneously, people are dealing with, of course, life and death situations. You need to understand that there are always going to be seasons of plenty, and there's going to be seasons of famine. There are seasons where you're going to be able to get everything that you need, everything's going to be working out. And then there are seasons where basically, all of a sudden things get scarce. Now, unfortunately, if you are not preparing for those seasons of famine, you are going to be caught off guard. Right now in the United States, for example, 60% of every American, and in Canada, about 55% of every Canadian is living paycheck to paycheck. That means that if anything comes along their way, they are close to insolvency or bankruptcy. And of course, I was listening to a fella just the other day on TikTok, and he said this. He says, I am only one paycheck away from insolvency. And he says, everything is going up except my paycheck. And so he was, of course, having one of those rants. And the simple fact is that most of us, we don't practice what we would call savings and also due diligence. Now, I know, for example, that many of the financial advisors will tell you, listen, not only should you save for, of course, your retirement, but you should also have an emergency fund. And when you are in that time of plenty, when you are making good money and you're able to pay your bills, that's when you should be setting money aside. And even $5 a day can make such a difference. You say, what do you mean? Well, if you save $5 a day, you'll have $150 a month that you can put into savings or into an emergency fund. And by the end of the year, you will have $1,800 sitting in a savings or into an emergency fund. Well, over 5 years, all of a sudden, you've got almost $10,000 to be able, and so every little bit that you do, and you say, okay, $5. Well, $5 is a cup of coffee. Or in the case of my wife and myself, it happens to be, of course, 2 steep teas. That's $5 a day. And so if you're able to do that, you should be able to do that. That was a simple principle that I operated by every time while I was working. The simple fact is that I made sure that I had not only money during, for the saving up for the bad times, but also as well an emergency fund. And God was good. Okay, so here we have Joseph. He is now in the first year of the famine. And so people come to Pharaoh and say, Pharaoh, we are having a hard time because our crops are failing. All the rain that normally we get is not happening. And also during that time, the Nile River was not providing what it normally provides. If it's yearly runs of water and creating that oasis type of atmosphere and also conditions in the nation of Egypt. So, and this famine was not just in Egypt, it was in the entire Middle East. You have to understand that weather patterns in the Middle East are greatly affected by two things. Number one, they are affected by, of course, the Sahara Desert. The Sahara Desert is right next door to Egypt. And the second factor is the Mediterranean Sea. So if the Mediterranean Sea and the Sahara have periods where there is no rain, then what happens is that entire area is affected. We see, for example, when the nation of Israel left under Moses, it would have taken them 11 days to get from Egypt into the promised land. Instead, they ended up wandering around 40 years in the desert because of disobedience. So it isn't a big trip to travel from Egypt to, of course, Israel. And in fact, today, if you get in an automobile, you can make that trip in just a few hours. Why? Because it is actually rather close. They are only a couple hundred miles apart. So, of course, whatever happens in Egypt weather-wise also affects, of course, Israel and Lebanon, because of the simple fact is their close proximity. They're both on the Mediterranean Sea. So during that time, obviously, the two major factors, that being the Sahara Desert and also as well the weather patterns on the Mediterranean Sea, caused this particular drought situation. And I want to tell you, even today, there are drought conditions within Israel and Egypt, and they are affected by the same weather patterns. The only difference today is the fact that we have modern technology that is able to offset those particular factors. Now, so Joseph, of course, was the Pharaoh said, "You need to go and talk to Joseph." So the people went and talked to Joseph, and Joseph began a plan where in the first year he said, "Listen, what we want you to do is, of course, sell your cattle and your different, um, you know, assets that you have." And the people did do that. They actually sold their assets to Joseph. Joseph, of course, was representing Pharaoh, and he was able to give them the food and the sustenance and the supplies that they needed. This was, of course, a great benevolence when it came along. And now it's interesting that each year that the people would come along and ask something from Joseph, Joseph then would represent Pharaoh. And because of all his administrative abilities, he was actually able to save the people. And not only did he save the people, but he also became very benevolent to the different nations around him as well. He did not hoard this to himself. You see, when people come along and say, "We are going to have it first," like right now, there's an administration in the United States who are basically saying to the entire world, it is America first. So what are they doing? They have lost the ability and also as well the compassion that goes along with a nation that is prosperous. Whenever we pull back and whenever we hold on to something ourselves, we are actually demonstrating selfishness, and we are self-centered, and we are self-reliant. And that's what's happening right now in the United States. They have basically said to all these countries around the world, "You guys have a trade deficit with us." For example, they have been saying to the nation of Canada, where I live, they say, "Well, you guys, we've been supporting you to the tune of anywhere from 200 to 400 billion dollars a year," not recognizing that they were buying our goods and our services. That's what. And so, in the mindset of the modern day American administration, a trade deficit or a trade imbalance is, of course, a perfect reason or excuse to shove tariffs on an ally or countries around the world. And it gets a little bit crazy when you start doing that and you start turning on your allies, and it's all because of this selfish mentality. It is actually an anti-Christian mentality. And the worst part about this is the fact that many of those in the administrations claim to be Christians. And unfortunately, they are not demonstrating the very principles of Christ. Now, Joseph lived in a society, okay, where he could have been very, "I'm sorry, guys, we're not going to help you." But that wasn't the mindset of Joseph. You see, Joseph knew that kindness and goodness will always bring about the positive results. If you choose to be defensive, if you choose to be, of course, selfish, you are going to find out very quickly that there are negative consequences that are happening to your actions. And that's what's happening in the United States. The world is basically saying to the United States, "Okay, we're not going to buy from you anymore. We're not going to visit your country anymore. We're going to basically, do something else." My nation of Canada, for example, has been going to Europe been going to Asia. We've been selling our oil, our natural resources, our, the special goods that we have. We said, okay, we're not going to do that anymore with you. For example, most Canadian stores are not now buying American goods, and we are buying goods from all over the world. A perfect example of that was this, that my wife and I, a couple of weeks ago, went to the store to buy oranges. Normally, we would buy oranges from the United States, from Florida. And for many years, Florida says we have the best oranges. And there was no doubt. But because of the attitude of the present administration in the United States, 80% of Canadians have changed their habits of what we would call buying American goods. We basically say, okay, we won't do it. So American goods coming into Canada are basically on staying on the shelves. You can have tomatoes or maybe oranges from America, and they'll sit on the shelf. Where last time we bought oranges from Portugal and Spain, not because of the fact that there wasn't American oranges, because our store did not carry American products anymore. Why? Because of the rhetoric that's been going on in the United States. And people change their habits very, very quickly. If you are a self-absorbed negative individual, people are going to say, you know what? I don't have to deal with you. I don't want your negativity. I don't want this drama that you are creating. And so they changed their habits. That was not what Joseph was all about. Joseph understood that compassion and love and kindness and goodness and benevolence were the things that reaped good results. And so what happened was people started coming from all over the world. And this is where it gets really interesting. Joseph's family was having a hard time. Now, Jacob, of course, was a man who relied, of course, on agriculture. He planted crops and he had large, vast holdings of animals, whether it was sheep and goats and horses and camels and donkeys. Jacob was a very wealthy man. And all of a sudden, guess what? The famine hits. And so he hears via the grapevine that there is produce and also food down in Egypt. So he says, young men, you men of my family, I want you to go down to Egypt and I want you to buy food, without knowing that this was going to create an opportunity and also as well a challenge for Joseph. Okay, this is where it gets really interesting, and that's where I want to go with our next time together, where Joseph meets his brothers, and his brothers all of a sudden find themselves in a situation of their own making. This is a very important confrontation, and also as well an important lesson for us to learn today. And that will be, of course, tomorrow. Now, the reason why I chose to talk about, Joseph dealing with people is because of the simple fact that every day you and I have an opportunity to interact with different types of people. Some people that we meet, they are what we would call sandpaper people. And they are the people that God allows into our lives to rub off the rough edges. Believe it or not, you and I all have rough edges. There are certain characteristics and habits and problems in our personality, and they can only be exposed by certain types of people. People that rub us the wrong way, people that complicate our lives, people who are rude, people who are selfish, people who are condescending, people who are scornful, and people who are mockers, people who are cynics and skeptics. We don't know exactly reason why they become what they become. But we do know this: we have an obligation to react to them in the right way. They will often say the wrong thing, do the wrong thing, and be the wrong kind of person in our presence. And that's when you and I have to make a decision. That decision is, how are we going to react to them? And one of the things that we need to remember is that no matter what anyone does to us, we are not going to do the same to them. We are going to treat them the way that we would want to be treated. Now, in some cases, that is rather difficult. It could be somebody that is in your family situation. It could be someone who is in your work situation. It could be someone that you react on the street with or in the marketplace. Wherever it is, those people are allowed to be in your lives by the Lord to allow you to grow in the grace and knowledge of the Lord Jesus Christ. Remember, we are called to walk in love, acceptance, and forgiveness. And that is not an easy road to walk. You must remember what Chuck Swindoll said. He said 10% of all the things happen to us are caused by our 90% reaction. So it means that when something bad happens to you, whatever it is, your reaction is going to, of course, either complicate the situation or it is going to relieve the situation. It totally depends on how you and I react to that situation. Now, we talked about Joseph and how that Joseph was able to evolve, navigate, and adapt to his situation. You see, all the bad things that happened to him, those 13 years that he spent as both a slave and also as a prisoner, it could have made him bitter, but it didn't make him bitter. It made him better. He grew in those situations. His integrity, his faithfulness, his transparency, his obedience, his love, his skill, all of those things, his integrity, were the things that shone out. Even in a dark place, Joseph was able to thrive, bloom, and also as well become a person of skill and abundance. In the both the house of Potiphar and also in prison, he learned how to work within the confines of where he found himself. Not everything that we face is good, but we can turn it around for good by how we react. You know, it was John Maxwell who said simply this: it is our daily habits, the small things that we do every day, that are going to build and refine our character. I also read today and actually did a TikTok post on this about the fact that it is our little habits that will, of course, have a great effect on our bigger picture. So sometimes we need to do a little time of self-examination and say, okay, are there certain things in my life that, of course, are negative to people around me? And don't be afraid to ask somebody, but ask somebody that you trust. Ask somebody who will be honest with you, someone who will support you. I also, in one of my particular TikTok presentations this morning, I talked about the green flags that, of course, will show that these are the type of people. They are people that will support you. They are people that know you and also as well allow you to be you. These are people that will hold you accountable when you are being negative and selfish. These are the people who you'll be glad that you spent time with and not glad that you didn't, that you had to get away from them. These are the type of people that you want in your lives. You and I all need accountability partners. There was an organization back in the 90s called, of course, the Promise Keepers. And there were 7 promises that you made that you'd keep so that you would be a person of integrity. And one of them was allowing other people to speak into your life. and allowing your life to be a life of transparency and accountability. Allowing people to who are trustworthy and people who are looking out for your best interests to be individuals who say, listen, in this situation, you reacted wrong. In this situation, your attitude stunk. In this situation, this habit that you've been holding on to for such a long time is actually destroying your life. Those are the type of people who care about you. It was Adrian Rogers who said this: when you stand for truth, you are always going to find someone who's going to disagree with you, especially if they are standing on a lie. So it's important that you stand for truth, even if sometimes you have to stand alone. And a truth is a truth, no matter who believes it. And a lie is a lie, no matter how many people are subscribing to it. We need to stand for truth. We need to stand for honesty. We need to stand for integrity. We need to stand for compassion and love. We need to stand for kindness. We need to stand for, looking out for others and being a voice for the vulnerable. And that's part of what's going on in the city of Los Angeles right now. There are people who are being deported by immigration, and the communities in which they are, of course, being deported is standing up and saying, no, we don't want this to happen anymore. And so you find yourself with a clash with a government system and also as well people who want to protect their communities. And it is forcing people to make choices, and some of those choices have consequences. But let me just say this: when you see injustice, when you see the vulnerable being taken advantage, you have a responsibility, not only as a human being, but also as well a responsibility to the Lord to stand up for that which is right. Let me give you a perfect example of that. I was talking last Friday to a group of seniors. It was part of my presentation. I was talking about William Wilberforce, I was talking about John Newton, and I was talking about John Wesley. Now, John Wesley had the privilege to go to Georgia, and in Georgia, he saw something that absolutely shocked him. What shocked him was the fact that in the colony of Georgia, there was, of course, slavery. He saw in Georgia, he saw slaves being offloaded from the different ports that were there and were taken to plantations and exploited by the Georgian people, by the slave owners. And he spoke against it. And ultimately, he was asked to leave. So John Wesley heads back to England. He's got two things to think about. Number one is, what am I going to do about the slave problem? And number two, he's looking at his own life and saying, Lord, here I am, this man of God, speaking to my fellow Christians who are right now slave owners. I'm struggling with this whole aspect of slavery. So John Wesley goes back to England, and he also sees what's going on in France, and he sees how that the nobility of France has totally exploited and forgotten the ordinary people. And the ordinary people of France were rising up in rebellion. The seeds of the revolution were beginning to be sowed. And he knew that between slavery and rebellion, that the nation of England was standing on the brink, because the same thing that was happening in both France and America were strongly affecting, of course, the English nobility. Many of the English nobility and aristocracy were involved in the slave trade. That's right. Most of the ships that were traveling across from Africa to America were actually English ships. And so he knew that there was a serious problem. Also, as well, the British aristocracy and nobility was doing the same thing to the people of England as the French nobility were doing to the people of France. And so you had this underlying seething cauldron of rebellion and also as well, deep-seated resentment. There was a large gap between the rich and the poor. And we see that happening right now in America. We see the same thing happening. We see this big beautiful bill, which of course caused all these problems between Elon Musk and Donald Trump. It was because it is a large tax grab. It brings about $2 trillion adding to the deficit, and it's a large transfer of wealth from the poor to, of course, the rich. That's what's happening right now. And that's why you also see not just the immigration thing that's happening, but you also see the oppression from the rich to the poor. And so that's what's happening. When corruption begins to become evident, the ordinary individual feels powerless. And when people feel powerless, what's going to happen is they are not going to react right. So what happened was John Wesley saw this. Now, he said there must be a solution. So he began to pray about the solution. And the solution that he got was, you know what? We need a revival. Because he remembered what it said in Proverbs 14:34. Righteousness exalts a nation. Sin is a reproach to any people. So basically, John Wesley decided to do something totally different. He said, I am going to go throughout England and I'm going to preach the message of Jesus Christ. You see, Paul made that same decision in the city of Corinth when he simply said, I have chosen to follow Christ and Christ crucified. So John Wesley began to go throughout the entire nation of England. From one end to the other, he was preaching about giving Jesus Christ your life and allowing him to be the filter and also as well the lens in which you look at. And it was amazing. God moved among the people of England, and there was a great revival. And it absolutely turned the people's ideas and concepts towards love, acceptance, and forgiveness. Now, did the wage disparity and all those things change? No, but it led to monumental changes. One of the people that was affected by, of course, John Wesley's preaching was a guy named John Newton. Now, many of us know John Newton because of his great hymn called Amazing Grace. You see, John Newton was a man who was a slave captain. He actually captained a slave ship, and he would travel from Africa to America. And he actually said that he transported 10,000 slaves. And when he got wonderfully converted, he said this in his diary. He said, listen, he says, I hear every day the cries of 10,000 slaves. In those days, if you ever watched the movie Roots, you saw a perfect illustration of that. Also, there was a movie called Amistad that definitely showed the evils of slavery. And that was this, that slavers, if they found somebody who was sick, they would simply throw that person overboard, usually chained with a ball in a chain and thrown overboard, and they would perish. And that's basically the mentality of a slaver. A human being is nothing more than property to be disposed of in any way you see fit. And that was the basic mentality of most of those who were involved in the slave trade. John Newton had been involved in the slave trade. And so, of course, he was dealing with that guilt and also as well that responsibility of making it better. So John Newton, of course, was able to influence another individual called William Wilberforce. And when William Wilberforce, as a young politician, was influenced by John Newton, who was influenced by John Wesley, he decided to do something about it. What did he decide to do? He decided to bring it before Parliament. And so, after several, we're talking over 250 attempts to get slavery outlawed in the entire British Empire, he was able to pass a bill where Parliament said, we are not going to allow slavery to happen in the British Empire. This happened decades before it happened in United States. United States, slavery was outlawed after a civil war happened. But John Wesley, influencing John Newton, influencing William Wilberforce, in time had slavery abolished in the largest empire in the world at that time. And also as well, it gave British ships the ability to stop and, deal with the slave trade. And it literally saved hundreds of thousands of lives. And so when we walk with righteousness, when we walk with integrity, we can make a huge difference. So I just want to pray today, Lord, there are going to be opportunities today to be able to act and react with people. Lord, I pray that we will allow integrity. We will allow transparency. We will allow truth and honesty and clarity and wisdom to be a part of who we are today. That we would allow love, acceptance, and forgiveness, kindness to be a part of who we are. And that is a moment by moment decision. We decide what kind of people we are going to be daily. So, Father, I pray today that we would choose forgiveness, that we would choose love, that we would choose grace, that we would choose honesty and integrity to be a part of our day every day. It's an opportunity for us, Lord. And like Joseph, Joseph could have chosen to allow his situation to make him bitter, but instead he chose to make it better. Lord, when we see how he interacted, not only with those who wronged him, but those who had the opportunity to right, we're going to find out tomorrow how David, or I should say Joseph, reacted to his brothers. And it will be an interesting analogy and also as well a summary of human behavior. Joseph would show great kindness, but also as well firmness in dealing with his brothers. Help us, Lord, today to be kind, but let us also be firm. Let us set boundaries today, Lord, for what we would call those sandpaper people, and also how we interact with the skeptic, with the cynic, with the mocker, and with those that, Lord, have negativity as part of their lives. Now, Lord, I know that we don't know the journey of every person and how they became the way that they became. But we pray today that we will not find ourselves in a dramatic situation where we allow someone who is involved in drama to set the agenda for us today. Lord, I pray today that we will be wise and discerning. I pray that we'll be benevolent and loving, that we'll have and walk in the voice and be the voice of the Lord today. That is my prayer for each and every one of us. And I ask this now in Jesus' name. Amen. Well, of course, I always encourage you to press the like button and subscribe to my YouTube channel. Also, as well, I want to invite you to check out our daily vignettes, our shorts, the short messages that I give every day, both on TikTok and also as well here on YouTube. Thank you for spending time with me. God bless you. Have yourself a great and godly day. My name is Robert Dean Steele.